sinking enrollment at some state universities, and an impasse over the AFSCME and Rauner administration impasse. That's coming up next on Capitol View. If you're a student deciding where to go to college, do you want to go to a state university that doesn't actually get much state funding? We're seeing enrollment figures drop at some public universities in the state of Illinois. We'll talk about that. Also covering what came down after last week's Capitol View taping, a hearing officer with the Illinois State Labor Relations Board has written up her opinion on Governor Bruce Rauner's ask for an impasse to be declared with contract negotiations with AFSCME. Talking about that. Also, we have Kent Redfield here, University of Illinois, Springfield professor emeritus, political scientist. His specialty, of course, is campaign contributions, and we've got some news on that regarding a court case. So first of all, thanks to Ken.
Good to be here.
And also here we have Dave Dahl, WTAX, Tell It Like It Is reporter. I am Amanda Vinicky, the State House Bureau Chief for Illinois Public Radio and NPR Illinois. That's the Springfield Public Radio affiliate. And let's just get down to business here. I actually want to start with the news on the impasse, because that does reach back to last week, really on Friday. But again, it was after Capitol View last taped. And for the many people living in central Illinois, particularly in the capital city area, that are members of AFSCME and work for the state of Illinois, this has the potential to be big news. So, Dave, why don't you go ahead and explain? This is basically the Rauner administration back in January had said, after a lot of negotiating, months and months, over a year really, that they'd had enough in terms of trying to work out a new contract agreement with the state's largest public employees union.
Yes, the administration was seeking the declaration of an impasse, which would be a formal declaration that would allow them to proceed to either impose their terms or possibly open the door for a strike. The AFSCME people have said, we don't want a strike. In fact, we don't think there's an impasse, and it's you who's walking away from the table, Governor, etc. And what the administrative law judge said, what a way to segue into Labor Day weekend, was that not all of the points were at impasse, that yes, I could declare there's an impasse, but that's not the right remedy now. There is room on many of the points for the governor's office and AFSCME to return to the negotiating table, so please do that. Almost immediately, the governor's office issued a statement saying, we're glad to see this and we are going to study it. And AFSCME came out with a much longer statement, essentially declaring victory. And to the I wouldn't quite say the governor's office declared victory, but there was enough room for both sides too, as we await word that they would be back at the table.
So, Kent, is this the final say, or we do have the State Labor Relations actual board? This was just an opinion from an administrative law judge, a hearing officer, as I called her earlier.
Yeah, it's a recommendation to the board, and the board can act on it however they want. And this is not an uncommon kind of administrative procedure. When you have things in front of the State Board of Elections, you always have a hearing officer who then says, this is what I think the board ought to do, and then the board does whatever they think they ought to do. So you could still get the board could still declare that there was an impasse, which would get you to probably a showdown over the state's last best offer. I don't know that there's a lot of the AFSCME certainly wants to continue to negotiate on the real core. It's partially, part of it is wages, certainly, but the biggest hang-up is health insurance, bigger co-pays, less coverage, and perhaps more problems getting in to see a doctor in terms of who is or isn't covered by state plan. The reason that's important is that if you are a retiree of the state of Illinois, if you're all kinds of non-union people, this sets the template. And so a lot of people are nervous that aren't members of AFSCME because of the potential fallout where you could end up with significantly higher out-of-pocket costs for people who are covered by state health insurance.
Well, and really, we've seen, obviously, Governor Bruce Rauner sees that as a prime opportunity for the state of Illinois to save money. Of course, employees would say at their expense. And it's more than just overtime and wages and such. There's also, I think, subcontracting is an issue. That's something that unions see as an attack, and this broader attack that they believe the governor is doing on them with his kind of ditched call for a right to work. We do have an ongoing lawsuit in one of the suburbs that would allow for a local right to work zone, et cetera. There has been talk, because Governor Bruce Rauner had appointed, now he is the governor, this is within his rights, most of the Illinois State Labor Relations Board, that this could be a win for him. That said, the Labor Relations Board had been asked by the Rauner administration. They wanted an expedited hearing on this because one of the things that AFSCME said in its reaction was, look at all this wasted time we could have spent negotiating while this was going on. The governor had wanted it to be hurried up, and the board said no to that. Do we think, is this an automatic win for Rauner, that the board could grab onto the hearing officer's recommendation? The hearing officer, a professional, read all of it. It's something like, 200 pages, 400 pages opinion. It's big. And so the board doesn't have to agree with her in any way. What do you make of the governor's control?
I think it's premature to go one way or the other. I think there's still, the final chapters of this are unwritten, and the chapters leading up to the final chapters are unwritten. The thing that you're talking about, this kind of sticks in my mind, is pretty soon we'll be looking at 2 years of a Rauner administration, and what do we have to show for it?
You tell me. I'm moderating this discussion, but I guess I will put on my journalist cap and say that I think even Rauner would say not all that much. I mean, we could go through and make a list, and there have been some changes. He's focused a lot on criminal justice reform, perhaps some headway or changes in that. He has signed some laws into action. The medical marijuana program has advanced some, but that wasn't something that began under him. What has he accomplished,
You
guys?
haven't used all your fingers yet, Amanda.
Yeah,
You haven't used the fingers on one hand.
Yeah.
And we're talking about 2018 now. I mean, the campaign's on for 2018.
Yeah.
Oh, very much so.
And there's also an election in November, which means...
You don't say.
Which means that the closer we get to the election, then do you want to declare an impasse and throw the gauntlet down to AFSCME and see how that sorts out right before people are going to the ballot box? Do you want to, could be a strike, could not be a strike, could be a state shutdown, maybe not. There's the more uncertainty you interject into an election, the more nervous people get that are running for office. And so I don't think there's a lot of enthusiasm to kind of hurry up and get this done so it can become a campaign issue in November.
Well, because I think much of the wisdom is that if there were to be, say, a strike or a government shutdown, that would be bad news for the governor and for Republicans who had stuck with him, because it would be state services not available, a strike. We've never had one before. That said, is that maybe the wrong way to think of it? Could this be that enough of the Illinois populace is saying, we pay them too much money, they get these, what some people perceive as monster pensions. Way to go, Governor Bruce Rauner. You said you were going to do it. That's why I voted for you. Thanks.
And the polling is all over the place. You get a lot of polls that are written to get a particular kind of outcome, and so it's very hard to say what the general public, how they would react to this. And so,
if it even gets to that point.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
we're not there yet, but that is one of the possible outcomes if an actual impasse is to be declared. As you noted, it would basically be what? AFSCME, take it or leave it. This is our last best offer if there is an impasse. And then AFSCME, if they reject it, that's when we could see the possibility of a strike and then a shutdown as a possibility.
Yep. But we've gone this long without a budget. We've gone
This long without a contract.
Gone with a contract. It doesn't seem, so the governor certainly could force it if he gets a favorable ruling, but we may be just waiting on the election to see whether that changes the dynamic in terms of the General Assembly. And I'm pessimistic that that's actually, that we're actually going to get a clear message out of this election. But that was Plan B after Plan A, which was to force the Democrats to the table with the holding the budget hostage, and that fell apart because we were going to shut the state down in July, and so here we are.
So let's spend a little bit of time actually talking about the election since it's come up, and how can it not? First of all, if you turn on a TV, anything but this fine PBS station here, you're going to be seeing a commercial, I'm sure, for some candidate or the other. Some of these ads, as per the usual, are pretty darn nasty. Some could say a stretch of the truth, a little bit like some taffy that you could have bought from the state fair. What is at stake with this November election? How much could it change the tenor of what has gone on under the Capitol Dome in Springfield, Dave?
I was thinking about that on the way to the studio, and one thing would be if the House Democrats pick up some seats, that would possibly move them past a mathematical supermajority into an actual supermajority. I don't know what the chances are really of that happening, but the Senate is widely assured of a majority, possibly even a supermajority for the Democrats. I think in terms of trying to pick up seats for one party or the other, you're looking at a long game. In fact, I think Professor Redfield, you and I talked about this very thing because the Republicans aren't even fielding enough candidates to get a majority in the Senate. Even if every Republican on the ballot wins, the Democrats will still have a majority in the Senate.
Yes.
How could that be?
Well,
I mean, we have a governor that is throwing so much money into these campaigns. How could it be that they don't have?
Well, it's a question of opportunities. I mean, this is a Democratic map, and so it is very, very favorable to the Democrats, and there aren't that many competitive seats. There is 2/3 of the Senate is up, so there's a third of the Senate that, there are seats that might be in play that just aren't going to be up for 2 years. We're probably talking at most, I would say, 3 seats that are really going to be competitive. The Republicans have already picked up
Which
one.
ones do you know?
2 and they're all in the suburbs. They're all in the Chicago suburbs.
Melinda Bush, I'm thinking, is one that's in play.
Right, Cullerton and
Tom Cullerton, not the Senate president.
And I'm trying to think of
Well,
the
the
other.
one they picked up, the Republicans
Right.
pick up, is the Tracy.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So they're +1. They're +1.
Jill Tracy, meaning
Yeah.
because John Sullivan is retiring and there's no Democrat running.
Right. And they picked up Jacob's seat last time when a third of the Senate is up. So but they're still. The chances are they still would have a supermajority. And, if we're going to do, if we're waiting for the Republicans to take over the state, both chambers of the General Assembly before we get a budget, we're probably not going to have a budget until 2022 or whenever it happens.
Who knows?
And in the House, you're talking a dozen seats.
Okay, so, sorry, Dave, go ahead.
That's right. And to kind of complete your question, Amanda, certainly the governor will feel emboldened if his appointed controller candidate, Leslie Munger, wins. They're still bitter about it being only a 2-year deal, as we heard last time. It seems like the people must decide everything except the things the governor gets to decide. And the governor, of course, after Judy Bart Topinka passed away, thought he should be able to name the controller for 4 years. Instead, it's only 2 years. So I think the Democrats would have a good piece of momentum if they got Munger out of there and their candidate, Susana Mendoza, won. But the other thing is, of course, we're seeing how a lot of the candidates, at least here in the Springfield area, you've got the representatives who've been appointed, Bourne, Jimenez, and Butler. And Butler's not even seeing an opponent.
At least here, I mean, there have been more appointments up north also, a couple of them, where legislators stepped down and Governor Bruce Rauner had a hand, it seems, in choosing them. Matt Murphy will be leaving behind his Senate seat soon. Rauner says that he's not going to be active in figuring out who that is.
Well, here, though, with the union situation and so many state employees, it's a tricky vote in the legislature. And so the governor did promote some folks out of the legislature, Rosenthal, Poe, and Brower. They don't have to take votes anymore. So it'll be, you've got the race near here between Avery Bourne and Mike Mathis, someone who you could say is tied to Blago and Madigan, and someone who's tied to Rauner. You've got someone who, it could be said, helped fund Rod Blagojevich, and you've got someone who's not even old enough to have ever voted for Rod Blagojevich. So that,
Mathis Bourne, there you go, if you were wondering.
That would be in the Montgomery and Macoupin County area, and so you've got those
in
situations.
Springfield, we have
Springfield.
Tony DiGiorno and also Sarah Wojcicki-Jimenez. She is tied to Rauner. At least that's what Democrats are very much trying to, I mean, she is, but Democrats are trying to make that readily apparent here. Does she have a chance at losing, though? I mean, is that enough that she voted? They're trying to say she voted against what would have taken out this whole impasse question by moving the AFSCME Rauner administration process to arbitration.
Well, it is a tough district for a Democrat because when the Democrats drew the latest map, they took part of Springfield and most of Decatur and stuck it together to get a district that would elect a Democrat, that would be Sue Shear, and then a Senate district that's not quite as Democratic friendly, that is Annie Minoir. And the result of that is the city of Springfield is represented by 3 state senators, none of whom I believe live in Sangamon County, and 3 state representatives. So, this is the Democrats figured out that they weren't going to be able to draw a legislative district in the Springfield area that was going to elect a Democrat, and so they went to Plan B.
Or maybe now they could have, but too late. Those district boundaries are stuck years ago, so that's what we're living under now.
Yeah, and so it is, because to get a partisan advantage, they've wrung a lot of the competition out of the system and created a lot of districts where the lowest common denominator is whether you're an R or a D. It doesn't, that's your identity. It isn't, I'm not to pick on, I actually live in that district between Decatur and Springfield, and it just has no coherence. It doesn't, it's hard to say who you're representing or what this group of people actually stand for, and that's very different than the way we traditionally think about it, where the city or the county or a community sends their person to represent them in Springfield, and now we've got basically these very hyper expensive contests that are run by the legislative leaders, and now on the Republican side by the governor and the legislative leaders.
Yeah, Dave.
Everybody's on a first name basis with Sarah. Her campaign is going to have a lot of money. I think it would really be an upset if DiGiorno won.
Yeah.
Now, I do have a question just in terms of sheer numbers. The Illinois Senate, let's use that as an example, because there's no way we say that Democrats could lose their majority there. If every seat that was open this election cycle was challenged, could even then Democrats lose their supermajority, or they have so much of a supermajority now?
Well,
is it even possible?
Yeah, of the Democrats.
I'm just trying to demonstrate how much power they have now, really.
Yeah, I believe they would need to shift 9 seats, and
we're talking 3.
And they're only contesting 8, and 2. At least half of them are token opposition. So, they could run the table in terms of winning every seat where they're contesting an incumbent Democrat and would still not have a majority in the Senate.
And yet, were you surprised at all by places where we're not seeing competition? You named, for example, Tim Butler. That was thought to be an area where Democrats would try and take him out. That over in the Senate, you have to mention, for example, I'm thinking Dave Kaler was thought to be somebody who could be in jeopardy, that Peoria area district could be a swing. Thinking about, who else? Bill Hayne, perhaps?
Well, all you can do is look at the numbers in terms of where the leaders or the Republican Party is putting their money, and there really are only about 3 Senate seats where they're seriously spending any money.
I'm sorry, the whole process is incumbent friendly, and you mentioned Tim Butler. I mean, he knows the area like the back of his hand for all the years with LaHood. I almost called him by his first name. But with LaHood and with Davis, much of his district is north side of Springfield, Logan County, up into the Pekin area. It's not exactly Democratic territory, and Butler would be the incumbent, albeit an unappointed one. And asking about these unchallenged Democratic seats, it's not that Emil Jones III is just such a powerhouse lawmaker that everybody's afraid of him. There just aren't really Republican prospects in a district like his.
It's drawn for Democrats. So speaking about money, we did have this week a U.S. District Court judge make a ruling in a case that actually stems back to 2012, and you had the Liberty Justice Center. This is a free enterprise legal institute that was created, funded, we think, it seems, by the Illinois Policy Institute as a tax-exempt organization. The Illinois Policy Institute, conservative, has received money from Governor Bruce Rauner in the past and very much supports much of his agenda. Well, they don't have to disclose really who's funding them, and it gets into this really tangled web because some of the people closely affiliated and on top there have some PACs. Those PACs have gotten money from Governor Bruce Rauner. This entity, the Liberty Justice Center, as well as State Senator Kyle McCarter, he is a Republican, have gone up, tried to toss out really the state's campaign contributions law, in particular looking at limits or lack thereof on legislative leaders who during the general election cycle, there's no limit to how much they can give to candidates. Kent, as I alluded to, you are the go-to guy for campaign finance. What did you think about that judge's ruling? He really didn't seem to find any opening in what the Liberty Justice Center was trying to argue.
The Supreme Court has been very consistent. They've been very, very narrow, but they've been very consistent. And so, you can have contribution limits because you want to avoid corruption or the appearance of corruption, which is a very narrow quid pro quo. We're not talking about buying an election the way that most of us would talk about that. It is really, where you've got a situation where you're giving money and you're getting something back on the basis of policy. So contribution limits have been upheld, but as they apply to political parties, those went out with Citizens United, into free speech, into a set of more recent decisions. And basically what the court is saying is if somebody gives money to a political party and a political party gives money to a candidate, the political party can't corrupt the candidate. There's no quid pro quo there. And therefore, the fact that the state says that certain people are limited in giving money to candidates and groups like PACs, but parties are not limited, that's perfectly reasonable within kind of the way they've structured this, is that a legislative caucus committee, which is controlled by the legislative leader, is under Illinois law defined as a political party. And therefore, because it's a political party, then candidates can give unlimited amounts to political party, and a political party can turn around and give unlimited amounts to candidates. And so Governor Bruce Rauner's campaign fund can give money to the Republican Party committee, who can give money to individual candidates. You move money all around in these party organizations, and it's the legislative leader, not as, let's say, the House Democrats. It's not Mike Madigan's committee. He's got his own personal committee.
It's not the person, it's the leadership role.
Yeah, it's a legislative caucus committee. In fact, the law is so loosely drawn, there's a couple of legislative caucus committees that are just a collection of legislators. That there's a Southern Illinois caucus, and so it's a way.
But those are different, right? Because doesn't the law say that you're limited in terms of if a candidate can only get unlimited contributions from one of these caucus committees?
Yeah, if it is But it is a way to move money, it's a way to move money around. It's perfectly consistent with what the Supreme Court has put down, and so there's really no chance. And it means there's no change. I mean, that's essentially what you get out of this is, if you like the fact that you had a lot of candidates 2 years ago who were basically wholly owned subsidiaries of legislative leaders or political parties, then you're certainly going to like this election because we're going to have exactly the same dynamic.
And just to make sure, when you talked about the Sportsman Caucus or Southern Illinois Caucus, those are also freed from these limits?
Yeah,
it's not just the leaders.
You have to. I mean, there's a process to put them together, and frankly, the leaders are not like they encourage this. They much rather, all the money.
They want it to be under their auspices.
Throw through them. But and that's why you will get candidates who, if you look at their funding, this in any of the targeted races, you'll have candidates that have somewhere between 60 to 95% of their money all comes from the legislative leaders.
Or from the governor, which is a different subject all to itself. He's put a whole lot of money into the election cycle this time around. Before we wrap up, of course, want to get to what we had teased all the way along, and that is university enrollment. It is not down across the board. Up, in fact, at Illinois State University and University of Illinois at, I believe, really each of its campuses. But those are the universities that have been able to survive pretty darn well throughout the budget impasse. It's those that really were taking the heat. We're looking at Eastern Illinois University, Southern Illinois University, and Western that saw decreases of enrollment. I believe EIU down 25%. Dave, does this help their cause in terms of saying, legislature, hurry up, we need cash? Or do declining enrollment figures like that lead the legislator to say, sorry, look, why should we give you money? You're already failing.
You wonder if it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, but one thing that I think I have determined is that when we're done with whatever it is we're in, I think it merits hard decisions about what does Illinois need, what does Illinois have to support? Just because 100 years ago we had such and such a university in Charleston, Macomb, Carbondale, Edwardsville, DeKalb, does that mean we need them now? Maybe we need more universities. Maybe we should have more state universities, but maybe not. And I think that goes for a lot of the services, the social services and things of that nature. It's possible that people like the governor and those who think with him think, maybe the state shouldn't be in the business of, A, B, C, X, Y, Z, and we'll just see. We'll see.
Well, we'll see. This budget discussion, of course, far from over, and you know that CapitolView will be discussing it in the future. That's all we have for time we have for this week's program, however. So thank you very much to WTAX State House reporter Dave Dahl, and also to Kent Redfield, Professor Emeritus of the University of Illinois Springfield. I'm Amanda Vinicky with NPR Illinois. Catch us on Facebook. That's CapitolView Politics.